Rory Stewart's blunt dismissal of Rachel Reeves as the worst politician of the year might seem harsh, but the evidence suggests his criticism is well founded. Reeves' economic decisions, while ostensibly aimed at fiscal prudence, appear to have inadvertently destabilised the very foundations of Labour's economic credibility, and her missteps risk alienating businesses, exacerbating inflationary pressures, and trapping Labour in a cycle of reactive policy making. Her worst mistake, and certainly this is highlighted by Rory Stewart in the Rest is Politics today, is to raise the employer contributions for national insurance. And it's a striking example of poor judgment. While Reeves boxed herself in, says Rory, in with pre-election tax pledges, her solution targeting businesses was both economically damaging and politically tone deaf. And this move not only strained businesses already grappling with inflation and post-pandemic recovery, but also directly contradicted Labour's attempts to rebrand itself as a pro-business party. I would go on further, and I would say that she is also to be condemned for her arrogance and for her failure to listen. The erosion of the fiscal headroom, her wafer-thin $9.9 billion borrowing buffer has been eroded by raising gilt yields and inflationary pressures, and economists warn that with just $3.5 billion of headroom left, Labour faces a stark choice: further tax hikes or spending cuts by March. This self-inflicted crisis undermines the credibility of Reeves' fiscal rules set only a few months ago. Then there's the inflationary fallout. The record minimum wage increases and the £25 billion national insurance hike have fueled inflation fears. And investors are now wary of UK debt, with JP Morgan steering clear of gilts in favour of Spanish and Italian bonds. The knock-on effect is rising borrowing costs, which further constrain fiscal policy and risk prolonging economic stagnation. And finally, the misallocation of growth priorities. Reeves claims to prioritise economic growth, yet her policies funnel resources into public sector salaries rather than infrastructure and innovation. This approach does little to address long-term productivity issues and undermines Labour's economic strategy. Her blunders leave Labour vulnerable to criticism on multiple fronts. First of all, that the pro-business narrative is completely undermined. Labour's hard-won reputation as a party of fiscal responsibility and business-friendly politics is nonsense. Reeves' tax hikes provide fodder for conservative attacks, but they literally paint Labour as anti-business and economically reckless. It's not about how they are, how the opposition frames its wording. Under Kemi Badenoch, it can barely articulate a sentence, but it is a fact. It is a fact. And then the economic competitiveness is jeopardised by what she has done. By increasing employer taxes, Labour risks deterring investment and job creation, especially in a post-Brexit environment where the UK must work harder and harder to attract global businesses. As inflation ticks up and the economy contracts for 3 consecutive months, voters will lose faith in Labour's ability to deliver economic stability. Now, there isn't going to be a general election at least for another 4 years. So from that point of view, Labour is safe. But the country isn't safe. And that's the problem. While Reeves emerges as a glaring example of political mismanagement, maladroit fiscal arrangements, Stewart's criticism of not Stewart's criticism, Alistair Campbell's criticism of Robert Jenrick, who he describes as a wannabe Farage. I would describe him as an eloquent toad. Adds, I suppose, a humorous contrast, because Robert Jenrick is never going to achieve anything. Jenrick's performative politics and hard right rhetoric, or increasingly hard right rhetoric, is unpleasant. But as Alistair Campbell grudgingly admits, it's got some sort of effect. It's got some lasting impact. At least you remember who he is. Reeves, on the other hand, combines poor performance and catastrophic policy decisions, creating a far more consequential and damaging impact. It's like looking at a vacuum. You've got one on the Labour benches right at the front, and you've got another on the Conservative benches right at the front in Kemi Badenoch. The only people you remember really are the sideliners, the Hilary Benns and the Robert Jenricks. At least Hilary Benn has a history, and Ed Miliband. These are people of conviction. I don't think Jenrick changes with whatever mood he thinks is going to be favourable. And Rachel Reeves, well, she's locked into madness. Rachel Reeves' tenure as Chancellor is becoming a cautionary tale in economic and political mismanagement. By prioritising short-term fixes over long-term strategy, she has jeopardised Labour's credibility and the UK's economic recovery. If Labour wishes to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, Reeves must either recalibrate her approach or step aside before her policies do irreparable harm to both the country and her party's electoral prospects.